I didn't know who he was. That was the first mistake. The second was laughing too loudly at Marco's terrible joke about his mother's cooking. The third was not noticing the man in the charcoal suit, standing in the far corner of the ballroom, watching me with the kind of stillness that should have made my skin crawl. My name is Alessia. I'm 24, I work in event planning for luxury hotels, and I have a very ordinary life. Or I did, until that Saturday night at the Corsini Hotel when everything changed. The gala was a routine booking, a private family dinner, they'd said. 200 guests, Italian catering, orchestra in the East Wing. I'd coordinated 100 events like it. This one should have been simple. Marco was the hotel's head chef, charming in that careful way Italian men perfected over generations. He'd insisted on walking me through the kitchen setup personally, cracking jokes that made me forget for a moment how exhausting the night had been. We'd laughed about his mother's legendary incompetence with anything that wasn't pasta. And I'd touched his arm, just a light touch, nothing meaningful, when he made me laugh hard enough to actually feel the tension leave my shoulders. Then Marco's entire body went rigid. His hand dropped from my waist. His smile died. I watched the color drain from his face like someone had opened a valve inside him, and I remember thinking, what did I do? His voice came out rough. We should separate. I was about to ask why when I felt it. A presence behind me. Not threatening exactly, but absolute. The way you feel a predator before you see it, that primal part of your brain that still remembers the savannah sending signals to your spine. I turned. He stood maybe 15 feet away, but it felt closer. The charcoal suit fit him like it had been painted on, expensive enough to cost what I made in a month. He was tall, taller than Marco, with dark hair cut short and precise, and a face that looked like someone had decided what masculine beauty should be and built it without any softness, any give, any mercy. But his eyes. God, his eyes. They were the color of burnt honey, and they were fixed on me with such complete, devastating focus that I forgot how to breathe. Not in the excited way, in the something is wrong way. He didn't move, didn't approach, didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and the entire ballroom seemed to tilt on its axis. Signor Moretti. Marco whispered beside me. It wasn't a greeting, it was a prayer. Or a funeral bell. I didn't realize you were, I wasn't. You can go, the man said. His voice was quiet. Completely quiet. Soft even. The kind of voice that could order someone killed and sound like he was reciting poetry. Marco didn't need to be told twice. He practically fled, leaving me standing alone in a ballroom full of people who had suddenly become very interested in their champagne. The man in the charcoal suit walked toward me. Later, I would learn his name was Lorenzo Moretti. I would learn that his family ran an empire that spanned from Naples to Rome, that he was 42 years old, that he'd been widowed 12 years ago, and that he was one of the most dangerous men in Italy. But in that moment, all I knew was that he was moving closer, and my body was screaming at me to run. Except I didn't want to run. You work here, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm an event coordinator, I heard myself say. My voice sounded small. Thin. I coordinated tonight. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell him, something dark and woody, like smoke and leather in winter forests. Did you? Another statement. The way he was looking at me made my skin feel electric, like I'd been struck by lightning and hadn't died yet, was just waiting for it to finish the job. I'm sorry, I said, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. Was something wrong with the event? The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Something like a smile that had learned to mimic the shape without understanding what it meant. No, he said. Nothing was wrong with the event. Behind him, across the ballroom, I could see the rest of his party turning to look, phones straight in posture, careful in their movements. Important people. Dangerous people. I recognized the particular quality of fear on their faces, the fear of someone watching their boss's mood shift. I'm glad, I said carefully. Who is Marco? Lorenzo asked. My mouth went dry. Our head chef. He was just showing me the setup for. He was touching you. The way he said it, so quiet and factual, made the words sound obscene. I felt heat rise into my face. He wasn't. We were just talking and I, laughing. His eyes dropped to my mouth, then came back up to meet mine. You were laughing at something, he said. Yes. I hadn't done anything wrong, but somehow I was apologizing anyway. But it was just, we worked together, it was nothing, just a joke about, it won't happen again. It took me a second to understand what he meant. I'm sorry, he won't touch you again, Lorenzo said, with the tone of someone explaining an obvious fact to a child. He won't make you laugh. He won't speak to you if he can help it, and if he must, it will be with his eyes on the floor. You can't just... I started, then stopped, because I was looking at his face, at the utter certainty in it, and I understood that yes, actually, he could just dictate whether Marco touched me or not. He could probably dictate anything he wanted, and the world would rearrange itself to accommodate it. What's your name? He asked. Alessia Marchesi. Alessia. He repeated, like he was tasting it, like the word mattered. I watched him turn slowly and scan the ballroom. I followed his gaze. He was looking at his associates, the men in dark suits standing like monuments around the room. One of them, a broad man with scarred knuckles, stepped forward immediately. Lorenzo spoke in Italian, rapid and low. I caught fragments, the red files. Tonight, push it to Tuesday. Tell them the boss's schedule has changed. His eyes flicked back to me. Cancel the Valentini meeting. The scared man nodded. All of them. All of them. I'm unavailable. I realized, with a strange flutter in my chest, that he was canceling his schedule. His meetings. His entire night shifted or deleted, because he'd seen me laugh at another man's joke. When he looked back at me, there was something almost gentle in his expression, something that made me more afraid than the dominance had. You'll give me your number, he said. I can't. You will. And I did. I don't know why. My hands shook as I wrote it down on the back of his business card, though I barely registered what was printed on it. By the time I looked up, he was already walking away, swallowed back into his group of careful, frightened men. The ballroom seemed to breathe again. I stood there in my pale blue coordinator's dress with my heart in my throat, understanding with absolute certainty that my ordinary life had just ended. That something had been set in motion that I couldn't stop, couldn't reverse, couldn't even fully understand. I just knew that I was terrified, and underneath the terror, curled like something small and dangerous in my stomach, was something else entirely. He called at 11 that night. I was still awake, lying in bed in my small apartment in Prati, replaying the evening in obsessive detail. My phone lit up with an unknown number and I almost didn't answer. Then something. Instinct, curiosity, the strange gravity that had started spinning around me the moment I turned to see his face, made me pick up. You're awake, he said. Not asking. How did you? I started, then stopped. Of course he knew I was awake. He was Lorenzo Moretti. Knowing things people hadn't told him was probably basic. What are you doing? His voice was different over the phone. Closer somehow. More intimate. It made my chest tight. I'm in bed. It's late. I know what time it is. There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of traffic, the clink of ice in a glass. He was calling me from somewhere public, or at least somewhere he didn't care if he was overheard. Why are you calling? I asked, and then immediately regretted how sharp it sounded. Did the event satisfy you? The gala, satisfy. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with something I didn't have a name for. Yes, it was successful. Because of you, he said. The hotel is very grateful, they told me. I told them you would be doing all their events from now on. I sat up in bed, pulling my sheet higher. You can't decide that. That's not how. That's done, Alessia. The hotel manager agreed. You'll coordinate the Corsini's private events exclusively. You'll be very busy, very compensated. I don't need. You'll report directly to Signor Benedetti, the manager. No one else will hire you for private events now. Only him. Only me in effect. I felt something twist in my stomach. He just boxed me in. Made it so that I was tangled with him professionally before anything else. Made it so that my job, my livelihood, was now bound up in his orbit. That's not fair. I whispered. No, he agreed. It's not. But it's necessary. If you were still free to work with other men, other families, I'd have to know where you were. Who you were with. How their hands touched you. This is simpler. You can't control my life like this. I can and I have. He said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather. Tomorrow you'll receive a phone. A phone that calls only me. If you need anything, you'll call it. If you're in danger, you'll call it. If you're frightened or lonely or curious. I'm hanging up, I said, but I didn't move. You're not. He was right. My hand was shaking, but I was still pressed to the phone. Who are you? I asked. What do you do? There was a long pause. Long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then, I'm the kind of man whose name opens doors and closes them, whose word ends arguments, whose attention is a blessing and a curse depending on which direction you're standing. His voice dropped lower. And right now, Alessia, that attention is entirely on you. Why? You don't even know me. I know you work too hard. I know you laugh easily but carefully, like you're afraid to want too much. I know you have kind hands and a frightened heart. I know that Marco has wanted you for months, and never had the courage to touch you the way he wanted to. And I know that when you realized someone was watching you, you didn't look away. My throat felt tight. What do you want from me? Everything? He said simply. But we have time. I'm very patient, Alessia, I can wait. But understand this, you're not going back to your ordinary life. That life is finished. You're in my life now. You'll stay in it whether it pleases you or frightens you or both. And if I refuse, you won't. The line went dead. He hung up before I could answer, leaving me in the darkness of my small bedroom, holding a phone that suddenly felt like a tether. The new phone arrived the next morning. It was sleek and black, like something dangerous disguised as an object. When I turned it on, there was one contact: Lorenzo. I didn't use it for 3 days. On the 4th day, working at the Corsini's Wednesday private dinner, I felt it. The sensation of being watched. I turned to find one of his men, always the same one, scarred knuckles, broad shoulders, standing in the corner, watching me, reporting back, presumably. On the 5th day I called the phone. Yes, he answered. Immediately, like he'd been waiting. There's a man watching me, I said. At work. Matteo. He's there for your protection? I don't need protection. You do. You exist now in the world in a different way. People know you're mine to look at, mine to protect. There are men who would use that against you, against me. Matteo makes sure that doesn't happen. Stop saying I'm yours. I'm not a possession. No, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. You're better than a possession. A possession can be stolen. You're something I've claimed, which is different. Safer. He paused. Are you frightened? I wanted to lie. Instead I said, yes, good. Frightened is safe. Frightened keeps you careful. Frightened keeps you alive. When will I see you? The question escaped before I could stop it. There was a beat of silence. When he spoke again, his voice was darker. When you're ready. When you've understood what it means to be mine. When you stop fighting it. When your fear becomes something else. He hung up again, leaving me in the kitchen of the Corsini, with my hands shaking and my heart racing, understanding that I was falling toward something I couldn't escape. 2 weeks later, I learned that power wasn't just about authority. It was about the things people were willing to do. I discovered this when Marco stopped coming to work. Signor Benedetti called me into his office, his hands shaking slightly as he explained that Marco had accepted a position at a restaurant in Milan. An incredible opportunity, he said, a 5-star establishment. Marco had been very eager to take it, and it would start immediately. I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen Marco at the cafe near the Corsini on Monday, and he'd looked hollowed out, like something essential had been removed from inside him. When he'd seen me, he'd crossed the street to avoid me, keeping his eyes on the ground. That afternoon I used the black phone. You sent him away, I said when Lorenzo answered. I removed him from your proximity. There's a difference. You ruined his life. He was happy here. He was sniffing after you. That made him a problem. I wanted to rage at him. Instead, I found myself trembling. He didn't do anything wrong. He was just kind to me. Kindness that looked like desire. Lorenzo said. Kindness that made you laugh and touch his arm and forget that you belong to a different world now. That makes it wrong. I don't belong to anyone. Alessia. His voice had that particular tone now, the one that made my skin electric. Stop fighting. You lose every time you fight. He was right, and that was what terrified me most. 3 days later, I was working an intimate dinner for 12 people when Lorenzo walked in. I didn't hear him enter. The kitchen door opens quietly on the marble floor of the private dining room, but I felt him like a change in atmospheric pressure. I was arranging the aperitivo course, and my hands actually stilled over the plates. He was dressed more casually than I'd seen before, dark slacks, and a cream silk shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. It made him look less like a businessman and more like what he actually was, a predator comfortable in his own skin, confident enough not to need armor. The guests were already seated. Through the kitchen door's porthole, I could see them straighten when he entered. See the subtle shift as 12 important people recalibrated their understanding of the evening's hierarchy. Signor Benedetti appeared at the kitchen door, pale. He's asking for you. Tell him I'm busy. Alessia. Benedetti's voice dropped. You don't refuse that request. I wiped my hands on a towel with deliberate slowness, making him wait. But my heart was hammering, and I knew he could feel it the way he'd feel prey running, the vibration of it in the air around me. When I walked into the dining room, the conversation died. Not obviously, everyone pretended to keep eating, kept their eyes on their plates, but the room itself held its breath. Lorenzo stood at the far end of the table, one hand resting on the back of an empty chair. When his eyes found me, I saw something in them that hadn't been there before. Something raw, hungry, but held on a very tight leash. "Alessia," he said, and my name sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. "Come here." I should have refused. Every instinct that kept me safe said to refuse. Instead, I walked toward him, feeling the weight of 12 pairs of eyes tracking my movement, understanding that this was a demonstration, that he was showing something to these people. When I reached him, he pulled out the chair. "Sit." "I can't. I'm working." "You're not anymore. You're here with me now." One of the guests, a woman with kind eyes and steel in her spine, looked between us and smoothly said, "I think your special course is exquisite, Signor Moretti. We should let your staff return to the kitchen, shouldn't we?" There was a careful pause. Then Lorenzo smiled, and it changed his face entirely. It was a real smile, the kind that suggested he was fond of her. "You're kind, Signora," he said, "but I think my guest and I will take coffee in the library. Everyone can continue." He stood and offered me his hand. "Come, Alessia." I took it because not taking it felt like it would cause a scene, and I understood now that he deliberately prevented scenes. He preferred everyone to accommodate him with grace. His hand was warm and strong, and it swallowed mine completely. The library was on the second floor, all dark wood and leather, bound books that I suspected nobody had actually read. He locked the door behind us, and my breath came short. "You're angry," he observed, walking toward the far wall of windows that overlooked the city. "But your anger is beautiful on you. It colors your skin and makes your eyes bright. You should be angry at me more often." "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm frightened. There's a difference." He turned to look at me, and there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. Something that suggested that beneath the power and the control and the absolute certainty, there was a man who could break. "Come here," he said again, but gently this time. I should have refused. Instead, I walked toward him. When I reached the window, he extended his arm, and after a moment, I stood beside him, looking out at Rome spread beneath us like a kingdom. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked quietly. "No. I see a woman who should never have to be afraid, who should be protected and held carefully and never, ever given reason to cry." He turned slightly, just enough that I could feel his attention on the side of my face. "And then I remember who I am, what I do, the kinds of things that follow me. And I understand that you'll always be a little frightened. That the best I can offer you is a different kind of danger, one where the danger protects you instead of harming you." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. The city lights blurred in front of me. "What do you want?" I asked. "From me, really." There was a long silence. Then he reached over and gently touched a strand of my hair, letting it fall through his fingers like he was testing something. The gesture was so tender, so careful, that it somehow frightened me more than anything else he'd done. "I want you to stay," he said simply. "I want you to stop running from this. I want you to look at me the way you looked at Marco, with something like warmth, something like trust, but knowing the truth of what I am. And I want to keep you safe while I do it." He stepped back, tucking his hands into his pockets like he was restraining himself. "You should go back to the kitchen," he said. "Benedetti will be waiting. Tomorrow. You'll take the evening off, and I'll send a car for you. We're going somewhere private. Somewhere you can see what your life looks like with me, before you decide if you can accept it. And if I say no, you won't," he said, with absolute certainty. "Because you're already wondering what it tastes like. Already imagining what it feels like to surrender. And some part of you, the honest part, wants to find out." He was right. God help me, he was right. The car arrived at 8 o'clock the next evening. It was all dark tinted glass and leather interior, and the driver, a man who introduced himself as Paolo, didn't speak beyond confirming my address. Lorenzo's property was outside the city, built into the hills above Rome, like something that had grown from the landscape itself. Stone and glass and light spilling from windows onto grounds that stretched toward olive groves and cypress trees. When I stepped out of the car, the air smelled like earth and night flowers, and I felt something loosen in my chest, as if I'd been holding my breath for hours. He was waiting on the terrace. He'd changed from his earlier clothes into dark jeans and a loose black shirt, and the casual presentation somehow made him more dangerous. This was him without armor, and he was devastatingly compelling. "You came," he said, as if it had been in doubt. I said I would. No, you didn't. I decided for you, and you didn't refuse hard enough. There's a difference. He gestured toward the house. Come inside. The interior was sparse and beautiful, more gallery than home, with high ceilings and art on the walls that looked significant. But it was the library that made me stop walking. 3 full stories of books, spiral staircases connecting each level, a room designed for someone who actually read. You like it? He observed from behind me. It's beautiful. It was my wife's favorite room, he said quietly. She was much like you, soft in the places the world tries to harden you. She languages. Beauty. I turned to look at him. What happened to her? She died. 12 years ago. Car accident. Though some people suspected it wasn't an accident at all. The Valentini family was making moves against us at the time. He said it without inflection, but I could see the toll it took, the way his jaw tightened slightly. After she died, I learned that power without ruthlessness is just a pretty word for vulnerability. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. Don't be sorry for me. Be sorry for the men who decided to target her. He walked past me toward a leather chair and sat, gesturing for me to do the same. The reason I brought you here is to tell you clearly what you're choosing. If you choose me... My throat felt dry. What am I choosing? A life that's never entirely safe. A life where people will try to use you to hurt me, where you'll be watched constantly, where you'll never again walk alone in the city, or be unaware of who's near you. You'll be isolated in some ways and surrounded in others. You'll belong to a world that operates under different rules than the one you were born into. But you'll also be protected by the most powerful man in Rome. You'll want for nothing. You'll be respected because of your connection to me. And if you can accept what I am, truly accept it, not just tolerate it, then I will love you in a way that rewrites what love means. I was breathing shallowly. You're asking me to choose you. I'm telling you what choice looks like. Whether you make it is up to you. He stood and walked to a window that overlooked the grounds. I could see guards patrolling the perimeter, men with weapons carried openly. The sight of them made my skin crawl. Matteo told me something interesting. Lorenzo continued. He said that 2 days ago, a man came into the hotel asking about you. He was from the Valentini organization. My stomach clenched. What did he want? Information. Your schedule, your habits, where you lived. Whether you had family. He turned to look at me, and his expression was completely cold. He was wondering if you were someone they could use. And I reminded him that you belonged to me. That if they touched you, if they even approached you, I would level their entire organization. I would burn their houses and poison their wells and ensure that their name meant suffering for 1,000 years. He said it very quietly. Then I offered him a drink, and he accepted. Because he understood that I was being generous. Is that supposed to make me feel safe? It's supposed to make you understand that safety only exists now as long as you're with me. That the moment you step away, you become a target. That your only protection is my power, and my power requires your loyalty. He walked back to me, and his expression softened slightly. Sit down, Alessia. I sat, and he crouched in front of me, taking my hands carefully. I'm not trying to frighten you further. I'm trying to make sure you're not confused about what this is. This isn't romance yet. This is the foundation. This is the part where you understand that I will keep you safe, but the cost is your freedom. And what's the cost to you? I whispered. Vulnerability, he said simply. You're the only thing that can hurt me now, the only thing I care about. That gives you power over me even though I control everything else. Do you understand? I did. I understood that he was bound to me in his own way. That his protection of me came from genuine feeling, not just possession. And that terrified me more than the guards or the threats. I don't know if I can do this, I said. You don't have to know. You just have to try. He released my hands and stood. There are guest rooms on the 2nd floor. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow morning, Paolo will drive you back to your apartment to gather your things. You'll move them here. And you'll begin your new life. Just like that. Just like that. He paused at the doorway. Alessia. The reason I had Marco removed wasn't cruelty. It was mercy. If he'd stayed and if he'd continued to touch you, I would have had to hurt him. And you would have known that I hurt him because of you. This way, he's safe. You're safe. Everyone understands the boundaries. After he left, I sat in that beautiful library surrounded by thousands of books and I wept. Not from fear, though fear was there, but from the understanding that I'd just been given a choice, and every option in that choice led toward him. By morning, I'd stopped crying. I'd showered, I'd eaten the breakfast that appeared without my asking, and I'd accepted that my old life, small and safe and ordinary, was genuinely finished. The only question left was whether I could survive the new one. Living with him was nothing like I expected. It wasn't romantic. It was clinical, almost. He established rules with the efficiency of someone used to managing organizations. I had a room on the opposite side of the house from his. I ate with him only at dinner. During the day, I was left alone unless I ventured into his study or his personal spaces. In those moments, he was polite but distant, cordial but unreachable. The isolation was exquisite torture. I had access to anything, the library, the gardens, the home cinema, but it was access to a very beautiful cage. There were cameras everywhere, which Lorenzo mentioned once and then never referenced again. There were guards, always in the periphery. The phone lines were monitored. I'd overheard one of his men explaining it to another. I was not a prisoner, he'd said, but I was also not free. What I eventually realized, was suspended. 2 weeks after I moved in, I found him in the library at 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. The silence of the house pressed on me like a weight, so I'd gone looking for distraction. When I opened the library door, he was sitting in the dark with a glass of whiskey, reading by lamplight. He looked up, and something changed in his face. Some arrangement of his features shifted toward vulnerability. "You can't sleep," he said. Not a question. "No, sit with me." I did, sinking into the chair across from him. We sat in silence for a long time, and I realized this was something new, comfort in wordlessness. The room seemed to hold its breath around us. "I've been thinking about what you said." I finally spoke. "About your wife. About loving someone like this." He set down his book carefully. And I think it must be terrifying. To love someone you can lose. It is." He took a sip of his whiskey. "She made me less careful, less ruthless. After she died, I understood that softness is a liability. So I became harder. I told myself I'd never allow myself to be vulnerable again." "But you're vulnerable with me?" "Yes." His eyes met mine, and they were raw. "I am. Against every instinct I have. Against everything I learned from losing her. I look at you, and I remember what it felt like to care about someone's existence more than my own." "Don't," I said. "Don't care about me like that. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because I don't know how to care about you yet. Because I'm still afraid. Because if I matter to you that much, then you'll hurt people because of me, and I'll have their suffering on my conscience." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his glass and stood, walking to where I sat. He extended his hand, and when I took it, he pulled me up. Without speaking, he led me to the tallest window and made me stand with him, looking out at the grounds. "You see Matteo down there?" he asked, pointing to a dark figure patrolling the perimeter. "Yes." 2 months ago, he was working for the Benedetti family. Then the Bennetts tried to move in on our territory. There was a negotiation that went wrong. Matteo was offered a choice: stay with a losing organization or accept new employment with better terms. He paused. He chose us. He's here because he decided his survival mattered more than his loyalty. That's how the world works, Alessia. Not through grand gestures of love, but through calculated assessments of advantage. That's horrible. It's honest. He released my hand, and I felt the loss of it acutely. Love in this world is a luxury, and luxuries exist because we can afford to have them. You're a luxury I've decided to maintain. That's not cruelty. That's just the mathematics of how I'm built. I wanted to argue. Instead, I said, "I'm cold. Come to my room," he said. "Just to sleep. Just to not be alone." I followed him, understanding that this was another border being crossed, another wall between us dissolving. His room was larger than mine, more lived in, with personal touches that revealed the man beneath the power, a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and his height, a worn copy of Dante, a leather jacket hanging on a chair. He helped me into the bed, still dressed, and lay beside me without touching. The warmth of him was enough, though. The simple presence of another person in the darkness. "You're gonna ask me about her," he said quietly. "Your wife?" "Yes. Tell me about her." So he did. For hours into the soft darkness, he described Isabella. How they met at a university his family owned, how she'd been studying literature and had absolutely no interest in knowing what his family did. How he'd pursued her anyway, worn her down with persistence until she agreed to marry him. How, in the early years, they'd been genuinely happy, in that precarious way where happiness depends on not thinking too hard about the foundations it's built on. "I got complacent," he said. "I started to believe that love was enough to protect her, that my power was enough. And then I learned it was neither." He turned slightly to look at me in the darkness. That's why you can't matter to me too much. It makes me careless. And careless men in my position get people killed. What if I matter anyway? I asked. What if? No matter how careful you are, I'm going to matter. He didn't answer. He just moved closer and wrapped his arm around me, carefully, like I was something precious and breakable. And I understood that he was terrified, not of enemies or rivals or loss of power, but of losing me the way he'd lost her. For the first time since I'd met him, I felt something shift inside me that wasn't fear. It was the beginning of something else. The dinner party was a test. I understood that immediately. Lorenzo announced it casually one morning, mentioning that several of Rome's most influential families would be joining us. We were playing host, him at the head of the table, me at his side. The message was implicit: she's with me, completely with me, and anyone who questions that should reconsider their understanding of the situation. I spent the day in a state of low-level panic. My wardrobe had been quietly updated since I'd moved in. I'd noticed the new dresses appearing in my closet. The shoes that cost more than my former month's salary, the jewelry that whispered about wealth and belonging. I chose a navy gown that seemed elegant without being ostentatious, and I stood in front of the mirror trying to convince myself that I looked capable of standing beside him. When Lorenzo found me, he was already dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that made him look like something carved from marble and power. He studied me in the mirror with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "I'm terrified." "Good. Use the fear. It will keep you sharp." He stepped closer and his fingers found my hair, brushing a strand back from my face. "These people will try to figure out if you're weak, if you can be used. You need to show them that you're not in words, in presence, in the way you move beside me." "How do I do that?" "You touch me," he said. "Not in a familiar way, in a way that shows you're comfortable with me. When I put my hand on your back, you lean into it slightly. When I speak, you listen like his words are the only thing in the world. You're not subservient, you're not a kept woman. You're my choice, made consciously and completely." His hand dropped to my waist, and he demonstrated, pulling me slightly against his side. It was the most intimate contact we'd had since that night in the library, and I felt my entire nervous system respond, heart racing, skin electric. "Can you do this?" he asked. "I don't know. Try." The dinner was held in a private room at the Corsini, though they'd closed it off from the public entirely. The guests were 12 of Rome's most powerful people. Businessmen and crime families and politicians who understood the delicate dance of existing in Lorenzo's world. When he introduced me, there was a fraction of a second of surprise on some of their faces, quickly masked. "This is significant," their micro-expressions said. "He's claimed her publicly. This is a statement." I held Lorenzo's hand as he led me to the table, then sat beside him as instructed. The first course was served, something delicate and expensive, and I focused on eating, on breathing, on not screaming at the weight of their attention. "Tell us about yourself," a woman across from us said. She had the kind of beauty that came from privilege and time, and her eyes were sharp as knives. "You work in event planning, I hear?" "I coordinate events," I said carefully. "Private affairs mostly. For the Corsini," the woman continued. "A prestigious position, I imagine, for someone so young. How did you secure it?" Lorenzo's hand found my thigh under the table, a silent reminder of something: protection or warning, or simply presence. "The hotel felt I was qualified for the role," I said, which was technically a lie, though a small one. "And then you became his," another man said, nodding toward Lorenzo. It wasn't a question. That must have been a rapid transition. I turned to look at Lorenzo, and he was watching me with an expression that seemed almost curious, as if he wanted to see what I would do with this. The moment stretched between us, and I felt the weight of his trust, the fact that he'd put me in this situation without coaching me through exactly what to say. "I prefer to think of it as a choice," I said quietly. "On both sides, he chose to pursue me, and I chose to accept his offer. That's how relationships work, isn't it? Mutual selection." There was a pause. Then someone laughed, a genuine sound, and the tension in the room loosened. "She's intelligent," a woman said approvingly. "I like her." The conversation shifted to safer topics. Business, investments, news about mutual acquaintances. I participated minimally but competently, and when Lorenzo spoke, I listened with the attention he'd asked for. By the time dessert was served, I could feel him relaxing beside me, his body slowly releasing tension he'd been holding. Midway through the meal, one of the men, someone whose name I'd heard and immediately forgotten, because he smelled like cigars and cologne, leaned toward me. "I'm surprised you're willing to be with him," he said, "given what happened to his wife. Doesn't that frighten you?" The room went very quiet. Lorenzo didn't move, didn't speak. The dangerous thing about him, I was learning, was that he got quieter when he was most dangerous. "It does frighten me," I said honestly. "But not for the reason you're implying. I'm frightened because I care about him, and caring about anyone in this world is inherently dangerous. But being frightened and running away are different choices. I've made mine, and that doesn't bother you. The blood. The things he's had to do." Lorenzo finally spoke, his voice soft. "Marcello, I think you're forgetting your place. You came to my home as a guest. You're eating my food, drinking my wine, and you're questioning my companion's judgment. That seems disrespectful." The man paled. "I didn't mean. I know what you meant. You meant to test her, to see if I'd correct her, if she'd break, if she'd reveal any weakness you could report back to the Benedetti family." Lorenzo smiled, and it was the smile of a predator. "She didn't, and your attempt to undermine her reveals your organization's desperation, which is useful information. You should probably tell whoever sent you to plant that seed that it failed." The rest of the dinner was tense and brief. People finished their meals and made excuses to leave. By the time the last guest departed, my heart was still racing from what I'd witnessed. Not violence, but the promise of it. The way Lorenzo could command fear without laying a hand on anyone. When we were alone, he pulled me into his study and closed the door. I thought he might be angry at how I'd answered, might think I'd overstepped somehow. Instead, he pulled me close and kissed me. It was soft and thorough, and it felt like a confession. Like something he'd been restraining was finally breaking free. "You were perfect," he murmured against my mouth. "Completely perfect." I was terrified. "Yes." He kissed me again. "That's what made it perfect. You were terrified and you didn't break. You stood beside me knowing exactly what I am, and you didn't flinch." His hands were starting to move with intention, and I felt my body responding in kind. The dress was coming off in my mind, his hands on my skin, the careful restraint between us finally shattering. "Not yet," he said, though it clearly cost him. "Not tonight. Tonight you've already given me too much." He held me while I tried to calm my breathing, while my body ached with confused longing, while my heart broke and reformed in the same moment. "I think I might love you," I whispered. He didn't respond. But his arms tightened around me, and in the silence, I understood that he loved me too. That was the moment I became irrevocably his. It happened on a night when he came home bruised. I'd learned not to ask about his injuries. He had explained, once, that knowledge was dangerous. The more I knew about what he did and who he hurt, the more complicit I became, and the more of a target I was. So I'd learned to see the marks and not speak, to clean his hands if he'd let me and not ask whose blood it wasn't. But this night was different. He found me in the library, where I spent most evenings. I looked up as he entered, and I saw the barely restrained tension in his body, the way he was holding himself like he might shatter from the pressure inside. "Come with me," he said. He led me to his room, something that had become routine now, sleeping beside him, and he showered while I waited, sitting on the edge of his bed with my hands folded. When he emerged, he was in dark pajama pants and nothing else, and the sight of him shirtless, with the scars and bruises that mapped a life of violence, made my chest tight. He sat beside me, not touching, and for a long time we just existed in the same space. "They're testing me," he said finally. "The Benetti family. They want to know if I'm still willing to do what needs to be done, if power has made me soft." "Are you?" "I did what needed to be done tonight," he said, "and I'll do it again. But I don't want to be soft anymore, Alessia. I don't want to be careful with you. I don't want to wait for some perfect moment that might never come." He turned to look at me, and there was a question in his eyes. "I'm ready," I said. "You're sure?" I nodded, though nothing in me was sure. Everything in me was terrified and wanting and confused and certain all at once. He stood and locked the door, a gesture that would have seemed strange if I hadn't already understood that privacy needed to be enforced, and then he came back to me. His hand found my face, tilting it up to his. "If you want to stop," he said, "you tell me. I will stop. I would burn the world, but I will stop for you." Then he kissed me, and it was nothing like the kiss in the study. It was deep and claiming and unhurried, like he was learning the map of my mouth, committing it to memory. His hands moved to the hem of my dress. I was still fully clothed, while he was nearly naked, and he asked without words. I helped him remove it. The vulnerability of standing before him with nothing but silk undergarments between me and exposure made me want to fold in on myself. But his eyes, those honey, dark eyes, looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Like my soft stomach and uncertain posture and shaking hands were not flaws to be overcome but treasures to be protected. "Come to bed," he said gently. I did, sinking into the silk sheets that smelled like him. He followed, and his body covered mine, careful not to put his full weight on me. His hands moved slowly over my shoulders, down my spine, across the sensitive skin of my thighs, and each touch was a question and a promise. "Tell me if you want to stop," he repeated. But I didn't want to stop. I wanted his hands on me, wanted his mouth against my collarbone, wanted the feeling of being wanted by someone whose power was absolute, but whose tenderness with me was more powerful still. When he moved to remove my undergarments, I made a small sound, not of pleasure, but of vulnerability. He paused, and I realized he was waiting for full permission. "Yes," I whispered, the first time he touched me intimately. I was trembling so hard I thought I might shatter. But he simply held me, breathing in my ear, letting me adjust to the sensation of being completely open to him. When he asked again if I wanted to stop, the answer was no. What happened next was slow and careful. He didn't push me toward anything I wasn't ready for. When he finally moved inside me, it was so gently, so completely aware of the fact that I was nervous and new to this, that I wanted to weep at the carefulness of it. I did weep. Silently, tears running down my temples as he moved against me with a restraint I could feel costing him. My body learned quickly what pleasure was, what it meant to surrender to someone entirely. When I came, it was almost a shock, a sensation so intense and complete that it felt like dying and being born simultaneously. He followed moments later, his face buried in my neck, and I felt him tremble in a way I'd never felt him tremble before. For a moment, I held the most powerful man in Rome while he was vulnerable. After, we lay tangled together, and he didn't let me go. I was a mess, sweat and tears and the evidence of what we'd done, and he held me through it all. "I love you," I said into the darkness. He was quiet for so long that I thought he might not answer. Then, I know. It should have felt insufficient. Instead, it felt like everything. Because love in his language wasn't words. It was the care with which he touched me after. It was the fact that he'd checked with me multiple times that I wanted to continue. It was the way he held me afterward like I was the most precious thing he possessed. "I love you too," he said, finally, and his voice was rough with emotion. "God help me, Alessia. I love you in every way that's going to destroy me. Then don't let me go," I whispered. "Never," he said, and I believed him. For the first time since I'd met him, I wasn't afraid. I was his, completely and willingly, and the surrender of it felt like coming home. The attack came without warning, though I later learned there had been warnings that Lorenzo had simply chosen not to share with me. There were intelligence reports, threats. The Bonetti family testing defenses with small probes, learning the patterns of movement, calculating the moment of maximum vulnerability. They chose a Thursday morning when the routine suggested I would be alone. I was in the garden, in the enclosed space that Lorenzo had designed specifically for me. High walls, one entrance monitored by guards, safe in theory. I was reading Losing Myself in someone else's story the way I always did, when I heard shouting. The gunfire came next. I didn't understand what it was at first. The sound didn't match the word in my mind. But the guards near the garden entrance suddenly moved, becoming human shields, and instinct told me to run. I moved toward the house, but the main entrance was being contested. I could see through the windows that men with weapons were in the hallway. So I ran deeper into the garden instead, toward the far corner, where there was a small stone room that Lorenzo had shown me once, explaining it was a panic room, built during a time when his family had other enemies. I didn't question why he'd shown me, just pushed open the heavy door and locked it behind me. In the darkness, I could hear the violence continuing outside. Gunfire, shouting, the sounds of men dying. I sat on the stone bench and tried not to think about Lorenzo, about whether he was alive, about the promise he'd made to never let me go. It felt like hours. It was probably 20 minutes. The gunfire eventually stopped. The shouting continued, then faded. I didn't emerge until I heard his voice calling my name. Lorenzo was covered in blood. Not his own, or not mostly his own. There was a wound on his shoulder that was bleeding through his shirt, and his knuckles were raw, but he was alive. He pulled open the panic room door with shaking hands. He breathed, pulling me out and into his arms. Thank God, thank God. What happened? I could barely speak. An attempt. A coordinated move. They wanted to get to you. His arms around me tightened. They failed, but they tried. He led me through the house, and I saw the evidence of the violence: bullet holes in walls, furniture overturned, blood on the marble floor. 4 of his men were dead. 2 of the attackers were also dead. 3 had been taken alive, which Lorenzo explained meant a different kind of situation entirely. "You're going to my study," he said. "Matteo will watch you. Don't come out, no matter what you hear." "Where are you going?" "To deal with this," he said, and I understood that he meant the captured men, the ones who had tried to use me to bring him down. I didn't want to know what dealing with it looked like, but I heard it anyway, even behind the closed study door, even with Matteo standing guard. I heard screaming. I heard Lorenzo's voice, sometimes hot with anger, sometimes terrifyingly quiet. I heard tools being used in ways tools weren't meant to be used. I sat in his study, surrounded by his books and his private spaces, and I understood with absolute clarity what he was. Not just a man with power, but a man willing to be cruel in its defense. A man who could love me tenderly in the darkness, and cause suffering without hesitation in service of protecting me. When he finally came to get me, hours later, he was clean. He'd showered and changed his clothes, and if I didn't see the tension in his jaw, the particular quality of exhaustion in his eyes, I might have believed he'd just been having a normal afternoon. "It's handled," he said. "The threat is neutralized. The Bonetti family has learned their lesson. It won't happen again." "What did you do?" I asked. "I did what needed to be done." He pulled me against his chest, and I could feel his heart racing still, the adrenaline not entirely faded. "The important thing is you're safe. You're alive. You're still here." "I could have died," I said. "If they'd gotten to me instead of you." "They didn't," he said fiercely, "and they won't. I will not allow it. I will burn their entire organization. I will salt the earth where they stood. I will ensure that their name is synonymous with suffering for generations. Do you understand? Anyone who tries to touch you is signing their own death warrant, and I will honor that signature." I should have been horrified. Instead, I felt something deeply satisfied in me settle into place. This was the bargain I understood. This was what love looked like in his world, not romantic dinners and carefully chosen words, but absolute protection. Absolute commitment to my safety, no matter the cost. That night, he made love to me with a kind of desperation, like he needed to remind himself that I was solid and real and alive. It was less tender than the first time and more intense, less about learning and more about reassurance. His body learned the map of mine, claimed it over and over, and I let him. Afterward, as he lay with his head on my chest, I ran my hands through his hair and asked the question I'd been afraid to ask before. "How many people have you hurt?" I said. "Really. Not estimates, not guesses. How many people?" "Alessia." He was quiet for a long time. "If I answer that, you might not be able to pretend anymore. You might have to understand the full weight of who you've chosen." "I think I already do," I said. "I think I understood the moment I watched you make a man terrified with nothing but your voice. Hundreds," he said finally, "directly, maybe 50, indirectly, hundreds. Men I've ordered hurt or killed, families I've destroyed, lives I've erased. Alessia, I am not a good man, I never will be. I'm a man who loves you. But that doesn't erase what I am." I kept running my hands through his hair. "I don't need you to be good. I just need you to be honest. About what you are, about what you've done, about why. And you've been honest. So this is what I'm choosing, you, exactly as you are, with all the blood on your hands and all the men who fear your name." "And the cost?" he asked. "When the people you care about find out, when your family asks what you've become, when you see the bodies piling up because of your association with me. What then?" "Then I'll pay it," I said simply. "Because the alternative is living without you, and I've already tried that for 3.5 weeks. And it was the longest 3.5 weeks of my life." He lifted his head and kissed me, and there was gratitude in it, and love, and the kind of relief that only comes when someone chooses you fully, knowing exactly what they're choosing. "I'm going to hurt people," he said against my mouth. "Because of you, sometimes. Because of my need to keep you safe. That's going to be on your conscience in some way." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said, and I was. My mother called on a Tuesday. I hadn't spoken to her since I'd moved in with Lorenzo. He'd allowed it. I wasn't a prisoner, exactly, but I'd been too ashamed, too afraid of the questions, too uncertain of how to explain the unexplainable. When she heard my voice, she started crying immediately. "Where are you?" she demanded. "Are you alive? Are you safe? The police came to the apartment looking for you, and they said you were with a man involved in organized crime. They said, Mama, I interrupted gently. I'm safe. I'm alive. I'm happy. Happy. She sounded incredulous. Alessia, do you understand what they're saying about this man? About what he's involved in? They said he's a murderer. A criminal. They asked if he was keeping you against your will. He's not. I'm here by choice. There was a long pause. I could imagine her sitting in our apartment in Prati, the one I'd shared with her before my old life ended, trying to reconcile the daughter she knew with the woman I'd become. Why? She asked finally. Why would you choose this? I looked around at Lorenzo's study, at the beautiful house that had become my home, at the life that was so far removed from my old existence that it might as well have been another planet. Because I love him, I said, and because he loves me, and because when you really love someone you accept all of them, not just the parts that are easy. Alessia. Her voice broke. He's dangerous. He's a killer. How can you live with that? I'm learning, I said truthfully. Every day I'm learning. But Mama, the truth is that every man is dangerous in some way. The world is dangerous. At least with him I know exactly what the danger is, and I know that his danger will always be directed at protecting me, not harming me. We talked for another hour. By the end she wasn't happy, but she'd stopped crying. She'd accepted, in the way mothers do, that I was an adult making my own choices, even if those choices terrified her. Can I see you? She asked. Not him. Just you. I told her I'd ask Lorenzo. When I mentioned it to him that night I expected resistance. Instead, he simply nodded and began arranging logistics, where we'd meet, how many guards would accompany me, what safety measures would be in place. You love her. He observed. Your mother. Of course I do. I was trying to decide if I should let you go, he said, whether your connection to her was a liability. But you're right. You're an adult. You can see your family. The next day, Paolo drove me to a cafe in a quiet neighborhood. My mother was already waiting, looking older than I remembered, worry etched into her face. I ran into her arms, and we held each other like that for a long time. Tell me about him, she said finally. After we'd ordered coffee neither of us would drink. He's complicated. I started. He's kind to me, but he's not a kind person. He's careful and thoughtful, but he's also ruthless. He loves me, but his love exists in a world where love is complicated by power and danger and responsibility. Does he hit you? No, never. Does he force you to do things? No. I hesitated. He's very controlling, though. About where I go, who I see, what I do. But he's honest about it. He tells me it's for my protection, and I believe him. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Your father was controlling too. Not dangerous in the way this man is dangerous, but controlling. And I spent 20 years trying to make myself smaller to fit into the spaces he created. I don't want that for you. It's not the same, I said. Papa controlled you because he wanted power over you. Lorenzo controls me because he's terrified of losing me. That's a different thing, is it? She squeezed my hand. Or is it just a more honest version of the same thing? I didn't have an answer. I'm not going to forbid you from seeing him, she said finally. You're old enough to make your own mistakes. But I want you to know that if you ever need to leave, if it ever becomes too much, you can come home. No questions asked. I know, I said. And thank you. When I left the cafe I felt lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying my secret life like a stone, and setting it down had eased a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged. Paolo drove me back to the house, and Lorenzo was waiting on the terrace. He looked tense, jealous almost, though he tried to hide it. How was she? He asked, worried, scared for me, but she accepted it. I reached up and touched his face. She wanted to make sure you weren't hitting me or forcing me to do things. And you told her. I told her the truth. That you're controlling but honest about it. That you're dangerous but protective. That I love you and I'm choosing this. He pulled me against him, and I felt him relax. Your mother is very perceptive, he said. About how control and love are sometimes the same thing. Are they? I asked the question seriously. Is what you feel for me really love? Or is it possession? Is there a difference? He was quiet for a long moment. I think, he said slowly, that in my world there's often not a difference. But with you I'm trying. I'm trying to let the love exist separately from the possession. I'm trying to want you happy more than I want you compliant. It's harder than I expected, but I'm trying. That's all I need, I said. Not perfection, just effort. Just the acknowledgement that what you're doing might be complicated. Alessia. He pulled back to look at me. The Bonetti family wants to negotiate. They want to sue for peace. What does that mean? It means they're willing to retreat, to acknowledge that the attack on us was an overreach. It means we can settle this without further bloodshed. I understood what he wasn't saying, that he was tempted not to settle, that he wanted to crush them completely, that the only thing stopping him was me. What do you want to do? I asked. I want to destroy them, he said honestly. I want to erase them as punishment for daring to touch you. But you don't want that. So instead, I'll negotiate. I'll take a settlement that gives us everything we need and leaves them weakened but alive. I'll make that choice for you, because you matter to me more than revenge does. I kissed him then, standing on his terrace in the fading light, and I understood that this was what forever looked like. Not perfect love, but love that worked at being better. Love that made choices, sometimes painful ones, in service of the other person. Love that was willing to give up revenge for the sake of someone else's conscience. It was enough. More than enough, it was everything. The wedding was Lorenzo's idea. If we marry, he said one morning as we lay in bed, then legally, you can't be forced to testify against me. Your property becomes mine to protect. You become irrevocably tied to me in a way that even my enemies will have to respect. It was the least romantic proposal in the history of proposals, which somehow made it perfect. Because it was honest. Because it didn't pretend that marriage was anything other than what it was, a binding of our lives in a world that respected legal structures as much as it respected violence. Yes, I said. We married 3 weeks later in a small chapel in the hills outside Rome. No family, just the two of us and Lorenzo's oldest friend as witness. No white dress, no flowers, no tradition. I wore a dark red gown that made me feel powerful, and he wore the same charcoal suit he'd been wearing the night we met, and when he slipped the ring on my finger, I felt something final click into place. I was Lorenzo Moretti's wife. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The reception was at his house, a small gathering of people from his world, men with careful eyes and women who understood exactly what they were marrying. My mother came, and she cried when she saw me, though I wasn't sure if they were tears of joy or sorrow, or some complicated combination of both. Lorenzo held me during the party, his hand never leaving the small of my back, and I felt claimed and protected in equal measure. I was his wife, and everyone in the room understood that he would burn the world, before allowing anyone to hurt me. But there were shadows. The Bonetti negotiation had ended in a ceasefire, not a true peace. They'd retreated from direct confrontation, but their organization hadn't disappeared. The threats still arrived, though less frequently now. The guards around our property didn't decrease in number. If anything, they increased. One night, about a month after the wedding, I woke to find Lorenzo in his study at 3 a.m, going over intelligence reports. He looked exhausted in a way I was learning to recognize, the exhaustion of a man trying to solve a problem that might not have a solution. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing for you to worry about," he said automatically, then corrected himself. "That's not honest. You deserve honesty." He set down the papers. "There's a young man in the Bonetti organization. Very ambitious. Very angry about the ceasefire. He's planning something. I'm trying to figure out what. Can you stop him? I can try. But there's only so much I can do without breaking the ceasefire, and starting a war I'm not certain we can win anymore." He looked up at me, and I saw the weight of his position in his face. "Alessia, I need to tell you something about the life we're in. About what it's going to ask of you." I sat down across from him. "Tell me." "There will be more threats. There will be more violence, possibly. There will be times when I have to hurt people because of who I am and what I do. And there's a chance, a real chance, that one day, despite my precautions, someone will get to you." He paused. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know the truth about what you signed up for." "I know," I said quietly. "Do you?" He looked at me intently. "Do you really understand that you might die because of me? That your children might be born into this world of violence and threat? That you've condemned yourself and anyone you love to a life where security is temporary and peace is impossible?" "Yes," I said. "I understand. And I'm choosing it anyway. I'm choosing you anyway. I'm choosing this life anyway." "Why?" The question seemed to genuinely puzzle him. "Because in every other version of my life, you're not in it. And every other version feels like half a life now." I reached across and took his hand. "You're asking me if I understand the cost I do. The cost is worth it." He pulled me into his lap and held me like I was the only thing keeping him anchored. "I'm going to die in this world, Alessia. It's not a question of if, but when. And when I do, You'll become a widow in a world that will want to consume you. Then I'll be a widow with the protection of your name, and the knowledge that I love the most powerful man in Rome, I said. And I'll survive it, because I'm stronger than you think I am. The young man in the Moretti organization made his move a week later. He didn't attack directly. Instead, he orchestrated a series of violent strikes against Lorenzo's businesses, warehouses burned, shipments seized, key players arrested. It was a coordinated effort designed to destabilize his operation and position the young man as a revolutionary force within the Moretti family. It was also a miscalculation. Lorenzo moved quickly and with lethal precision. He didn't retaliate against the young man directly, not at first. Instead, he moved against the Moretti leadership, making it clear that they had lost control of their organization and were no longer capable of managing their territories. Within 48 hours, the ceasefire was over, and a new war had begun. This time, I could feel the violence in the atmosphere of the house. The guards doubled. The security protocols changed. Lorenzo barely slept, and when he was home, he was distant, planning, calculating. The man I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd shown me tenderness and vulnerability, seemed to retreat into the armor of his position. I didn't see him for 3 days straight. When he came home on the 4th day, he had blood on his clothes that I knew wasn't his. He moved like someone in pain, though I could see no injuries. He walked past me to the shower and stayed in there for an hour. When he came out, I was waiting for him in his room. "How many?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "Does it matter?" "No," I said, "but I want to know anyway. I want to know the price of what's happening because of our marriage." 17, he said, "directly by my hand or my orders. More indirectly. The young man is dead. The Moretti family is in chaos. By next week we'll have consolidated their territories, and there will be peace again." "At what cost?" I asked. "The cost of 17 lives," he said simply. 17 men who chose to go to war. 17 men who knew the stakes and played anyway. I walked to him and began removing his clothes, gentle, careful, like I was undressing something wounded. Underneath, there were new injuries I hadn't seen before. A knife wound on his ribs, a gunshot graze on his shoulder, bruises that suggested hand-to-hand combat. "Why did you do this?" I asked, touching the wound on his ribs carefully. "Because they threatened you. Because they threatened what's mine. Because that's what I do." "You did it because you love me," I said. "And that's going to cost people their lives for the rest of our lives together. Every threat to me will be answered with violence. Every challenge to your authority will result in death." "Yes," he said. "And you're okay with that?" "I'm not okay with it," he said. "But I'm willing to live with it. Because the alternative is letting you be vulnerable, and I can't do that. I can't function if you're not safe, so I'll burn the world, Alessia. I'll burn it over and over again if it means you're protected." I held him then, pressing my face against his chest, and I understood the true cost of loving him. It wasn't the threats or the guards or the isolation. It was knowing that my safety was measured in other people's suffering, that my love for him would inevitably cause harm, and still I didn't regret it. Over the following months, life settled into a new normal. The war with the Moretti family ended in our favor, and Lorenzo expanded his territories significantly. My mother visited regularly, and while she never fully accepted my life, she stopped trying to rescue me from it. I became pregnant in the spring. Lorenzo was quietly terrified about it. I could see it in the way he suddenly became more paranoid about security, the way he'd put his hand on my stomach and hold it like he was trying to protect the baby even before it was born. "A daughter," he said one night, his hand on my swelling belly. "I'm having a daughter, and I'm the most dangerous man in Rome. Do you understand what that does to me?" "You'll protect her," I said. "Like you protect me? She'll inherit this," he said. "This world, this legacy, this blood. She'll inherit a father who has killed men and a mother who accepted a killer as her husband. How is that protection?" "It's honest protection," I said. "You'll teach her exactly what the world is. You won't try to lie to her about it. And you'll love her fiercely and completely, the way you love me. That's the best protection any parent can offer." The baby came in October, a daughter as Lorenzo had predicted. We named her Isabella after his first wife, which I understood was his way of honoring the past while creating the future. When he held her for the first time, I saw him weep. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the tiny creature in his arms. "I'm sorry for what you'll have to carry because of who I am." "Don't be sorry," I said. "Be better. Be the man you're trying to be with me. That's all any parent can do." The last 3 months of the first year brought new threats. There were always new threats, but they felt distant, somehow manageable. Solvable through the systems Lorenzo had put in place. Our home was secure. Our lives were secure. As secure as anything could be in a world where violence was currency. In the spring, when Isabella was 6 months old, Lorenzo came to me in the garden where I was sitting with our daughter. "I've received an offer," he said, "from a coalition of families in the South. They want to establish a new organizational structure. Less violence, more business legitimacy. It would require stepping back from the day-to-day operations. It would require change. Do you want to do it?" I asked. "I want to," he said carefully. "But I'm not sure I'm capable of it. I'm not sure I can become less dangerous. Violence is the only language I speak fluently. Then learn a new one," I said simply. "Not for me, for her." I gestured to Isabella, who was looking at her father with the unfocused gaze of a baby. He picked her up, careful with her small frame, and held her against his chest. Over her head, his eyes met mine, and I saw something shift. "I'll try," he said. "For her, I'll try." It was no guarantee. There were still shadows in our future. Still dangers that money and power couldn't entirely mitigate. There were still men who would want to hurt him. Still circumstances that might force violence. The cost of my safety wouldn't disappear simply because he decided to pursue legitimacy. But in that moment, holding our daughter, I believed he meant it. I believed he would try. And in a world of certainties and dangers, belief in someone's effort to be better was as close to peace as we could get. The garden was beautiful in spring, and Rome spread out below us like a kingdom we'd conquered and surrendered to in equal measure. There was blood in the foundations of our house, cost in every protection we'd secured, but there was also love. There was also this, a man and a woman and a child, bound together by circumstance and choice, and a kind of love that was stronger than all the violence that had created it. There was also tomorrow, uncertain and threatening and still full of possibility. There was, against all odds, hope.